Hello and welcome back to the State of the Euros here on A State of Mind. I'm Seán McGill. I'm joined once again by Jack Donnelly. Jack, how are you?
Doing very well. It was a weird weekend not having this show to kind of either watch or take part in. So I'm happy. It's Monday and happy to be back here with you, Sean.
Giving you some routine to your day, Jack. I like that.
That's it.
I hope the people watching are the same. And join us very excitedly to give us some insight onto a fantastic performance last night in a team that will be looking to go all the way, as the tagline says there. It's Scott Coyne of the Belgian Football Podcast. Scott, how are you?
I'm good. Good to be here, guys. Thanks for having me back.
You must be better after last night's performance. I saw your tweet where you were praising the game management of Roberto Martinez. Why was that the big takeaway for you from this game?
Well, I think there was an expectation that Belgium would play their usual game. There was a little bit of criticism in the Belgian press this morning, I noticed, because they didn't play their usual high-tempo attacking game that they like to play. And they've been, used to playing against all opposition, really, for at least the last 2 or 3 years now. And last night, it was a little bit slower, as everyone who's seen the game will know, and a little bit more kind of ponderous from both sides a wee bit. But I think it was just the way they adapted to the opposition that impressed me. Sometimes, you have to... you have to change your game plan. And one of the criticisms I had coming into the tournament was I'm not sure whether there was a plan B, but actually there kind of is. And all of that experience really showed last night, the kind of structure in the performance, the control and the defence, which has been the big worry, I think, for everybody in Belgium was really good last night. It was tested for the first time properly, and lo and behold, it did all right. So that was all pretty encouraging. So, a lot of positives from the Belgian point of view to take out of that game.
That has to give confidence, doesn't it, that defensive performance? Because I think, like you said there, the sort of question marks, if there was any over this team, was the aging centre-back trio. And like you said, there was plenty of attacking talent on show last night from a Portuguese point of view. And I thought Thomas Vermaelen did a really good job of marshalling Cristiano Ronaldo at the back there as well. So when you're heading into these games and we know that it's going to be a tough game against Italy in the next one, how important was it that this defence kind of proved themselves, despite having all that experience and proved themselves over their careers at this point? It must give a big boost to the national team.
Absolutely. I mean, I think last night was huge, not just because they beat a really decent side. Obviously the current European champions up until last night, but I think the story from Belgium's point of view really is they cruised their qualifying campaign, won all of the games. They won all of their group games at the tournament so far. So this was the first real test where they were playing a side who were more than capable of getting a result against them. So to come through that fairly comfortably, I mean, Portugal stepped up in the second half. The pressing was more intense, and they really had a go, but they didn't really create that much. So being able to stand up to that for 90 minutes as well with that aging defence, I was kind of quite impressed by. A lot of the talk before the game was about whether Kevin Diedrich Boyata or Jason Denayer would start in the centre of defence, but in the end Bobby Martinez went for Vermaelen, which was a surprise to most people actually, because he's almost 36 now, so he's there really as kind of experience in the squad. So although when I saw the team lineup before the game, I thought, you know what, actually that's probably the best possible 11 you could put out. It definitely is. So fingers crossed for the injuries are not too bad, because one of them's a big worry now.
Yeah, talk to us about those then. Obviously, it would be very disheartening to see Kevin De Bruyne have to leave the pitch, and the same can be said for Eden Hazard, considering he kind of was giving us flashes of the Eden Hazard we remember, and that so many people enjoyed seeing the Premier League at Chelsea. So I think there will be hearts and mouths, certainly, despite the good result for Belgium last night. Those injury concerns have to be kind of lingering in the minds this morning.
Yeah, I think there was a lot of chat about it even during the game, actually, kind of when the red flags were going up. De Bruyne seems to have done something to his ankle, that Paulinho tackle. He's kind of turned his ankle, I think, a little bit. And the good news is he was walking on it and had ice in it. So that's quite an encouraging sign that maybe after a couple of days with ice in it and a bit of massage, I think he could be all right for Friday. Hazard's the bigger worry, because I think it's muscle related. And I know he's going for some tests over the next couple of days to kind of determine exactly what the story is there and how long he might need. But there is a lingering possibility that might be his tournament done. We won't know until kind of Wednesday. So fingers crossed there.
Jack, I know you've got your Chelsea sympathies, so it must have been nice for you to see Eden Hazard kind of come to the fore again, because it's been a real rotten time for him at Real Madrid. He just hasn't been able to get a string of games, and he did look, despite the sort of stuffy nature of the game, there was that sense when Eden Hazard got on the ball, as there always was in England, that something could happen when he was on it.
You've hit the nail on the head there, Sean. I mean, watch him at Chelsea, any time that he picked up the ball from a pass, you just had that feeling that he could just turn a game on its head and grab it by the scruff of the neck and go on and get a positive result, contribute towards a goal. And you were seeing that a lot at various different intervals last night, where he did kind of turn that on again. He's been plagued by injuries, just the amount of injuries he's had at Real Madrid. I think he's had more injuries than he's played games, or something stupid like that. So it's been quite unfortunate to see a once fantastic player diminished by his own standards, I suppose, and not being able to get that run of games. But there's still absolute signs of a player in there, no doubt about it.
And this might be the easiest transition I've ever done, but speaking of Hazards, we can move on to Torgan and talk about that fantastic goal. But also, Scott, Torgan Hazard was one that interested me coming into the tournament, because Yannick Freire Carrasco's had such a good season at Atletico Madrid in that left wing-back role. And to me, that he seemed the best suited for that role in the Belgian national team. But Martinez is stuck with Hazard, and so far he seems to have been repaid for that. Why is it that he trusts Hazard, has so much faith in him? And I guess you can also talk us through that swerving shot last night while you're at it.
I think I think he's just kind of seen a little bit more from him, to be honest. I think a lot of it is to do with obviously his relationship with his brother. So I think there's a kind of, not psychic, but there's something about having the two of them on the pitch together. I think I noticed that some of the movement off the ball last night was very much, those two playing off each other, actually, and the understanding they have about each other's game and where they're going to be in the pitch as well. I think Torgan just brings a wee bit more. I think, see when you get into killer positions and you've got to make that key pass, I think Roberto Martinez just trusts him just a little bit more to do that. I mean, you saw when Carrasco came on last night, he had a couple of great opportunities to send Lukaku through and just chose, the worst possible pass. So I'm not sure whether he trusts him to the same extent that he does Torgan Hazard. Really, he just seems to be able to step it up. I think just that little bit more. But Carrasco, I think, is actually a very good player. I think he's just a wee bit off it. It's one of those things where you look at what people are doing on the training pitch and you go, I think he's just looking a little bit sharper, I think.
You'd imagine very different management styles from Roberto Martinez and Diego Simeone as well. I'm not sure those team talks are going to be very similar. So maybe there's something in that, in a sort of character sense that changes it there. And you mentioned those sort of misplaced passes or wrong decisions from Carrasco, and I guess the same could be said for Romelu Lukaku in those closing minutes when it looked like Belgium had opportunities to kill that game. And we know what this Portugal side are like. They can pull a result out of seemingly nothing. So was that hard on the nerves last night when you saw these sort of missed chances to kill the game off? And did you get that creeping feeling that Portugal might just nick something?
Well, you know what it's like. The longer a game goes on and it stays 1-0, then you're still very much in a game, especially when you're playing a decent side like Portugal. I think the most frustrating thing about it was the final pass, which often was a bit dodgy last night on the break. Normally isn't. Normally they're so good at that, actually. That was kind of quite frustrating, and Lukaku's own frustration was actually shown. And I remember saying to the guys at the pod, we were having a chat about it at half time, and I was saying I'm almost certain he'll have been giving the boys a bit of piece of his mind, actually, because some of the service he was getting was really just kind of not good. But I think there was so much concentration going into actually just containing Portugal, particularly in the second half. I think that it was just a relief to try and get an out ball. So even if it was the wrong one, to get a break. from the pressure, I think was actually kind of more important than them. But I think all of that experience and all of that concentration really showed last night, and that's kind of what I enjoyed watching. And unusually for me, I actually was quite relaxed during most of the game because you could see they were in control of it, and I didn't really have a sense that Portugal were going to score. It's just that, as long as it stays 1-0, you don't know. I think the worst point for me was when they hit the post. Actually, that was a bit. Oh yeah, that was a bit hairy.
Yeah, definitely. There was a few moments where Portugal looked like they might just nick something. But Jack, we were talking last night as well during the game, and we were talking specifically about Romelu Lukaku. And I think I cursed him by saying just how good of a player he is. And then after that was when that sort of string of a few misplaced passes came. But he's still so integral to that Belgian side, and when he's on the top of his game, when he's doing the things that only he can really do, I don't know if there's a more enjoyable centre forward in world football to watch at the moment.
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think he was quoted fairly recently to say, or he was talking about his own comparisons, and he doesn't think there's any reason he shouldn't be considered up there with the likes of Lewandowski, Kane, your Ronaldo's, even going that far. And you can absolutely see why. I mean, throughout that game, he was so important in being able to advance that play. He could take a ball down from anywhere, realistically. He's got the strength, he's got the power to be able to hold up a ball, but he's also got that quick turn of pace as well, so he can burst away from the opposing defender and then look to get either himself a shot at goal or someone else. And we've seen him in Italy with Inter, a title-winning Inter this season. We know how easily he can find the back of the net. So I've absolutely loved watching Lukaku in this tournament, and I think it's going to provide a strong case for people to consider him much more highly than they did, especially after the kind of time the torrid time he received off the media in the UK, especially for his time at Manchester United.
Yeah, there was that moment where the ball was coming out the air, and he seemed to just jump right above Ruben Dias's head. And I don't think there's another player in football at the moment who could do that, and the way he brought it down his chest. Unfortunately, the layoff wasn't quite there, but it was that first moment genuinely got me sort of sitting up. He's just a fantastic player to watch. And Scott, we should speak about the manager, because there's often kind of like a sneering, I'd say, attitude around Roberto Martinez in the UK. But I think that performances like this, and if you look back to the one against Brazil in the World Cup in 2018, these are the kind of performances that I'm sure have a lot of people in Belgium really invested in his tenure. Is that the case? Do you think he's harshly treated here, and what's the perception of him in Belgium?
I think on the whole, he's a very underrated manager, particularly here, kind of in the UK. You know what I mean? There is an attitude towards him that, he's not really done that much, and how did he get a job like that? I could tell the story exactly of how he got the job, because it's actually a very interesting one. I think in Belgium, I think he's respected. I think there is a section of fandom that kind of feels slightly uninspired by him, and I've never really understood that, because actually I think the job he's done there has been immense, actually. I mean, he's been in post for a little bit over 5 years now, and is very happy there. And I think he might be staying for a while longer. There's a lot of speculation that he's looking for a role back in club football. But I don't think that's the case. I think the situation is, from his agent's perspective, you're always open to take a phone call from somebody and have a conversation, aren't you? His family are very happy there. I think he's got a very good relationship with the Belgian FA as well. There's a long-term project there that they're right in the middle of at the moment, that's going to kind of ensure that the next generation of Belgian football is extremely strong as well, at least for the next sort of 10 to 20 years. And he's got a staff team there at the Belgian FA who he gets on very well and has a great working relationship. And the thing with Roberto Martinez that I would always push when I talk to people, because people don't often see it, as what a good communicator he actually is. People like him, and people warm to him, and that squad of players really respect him. I think they enjoy working with him, and I think that shows. You need to take people with you in a job like that, and he's absolutely done that. And I think whenever he does leave that role, I think it will be a big loss for the Belgian FA, actually, a really, really big loss. So it's important that they've got things in place now that will outlast that point whenever that point comes. There was some noise last night on social media about, why didn't he make substitutions a little bit earlier? But hindsight's a wonderful thing, and the reality is actually that squad is so set now in the best 11 that there's actually very little room for manoeuvre at all there, really. And he knows exactly who he's going to bring in, should there be an injury as well. So it's a well-oiled machine which is kind of operating at the top of its game at the moment, and it's just kind of trying to keep it there for the next week and a half.
Can you tell us that interesting story of Roberto Martinez getting the job? Because I think it did take a lot of people by surprise back in 5 years ago now.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing you have to understand about Belgium is obviously it's a multilingual country. So you have Flanders in the north and west, where Dutch is the predominant language. Then around the Brussels area, the capital, and the south of Belgium, French is the dominant language. There's a small area in the east of Belgium, right near the German border, a very small area where about 1% of the population speak German, actually, and that's the main language there. And that's because of a hangover to do with territory related to the First World War. That's the history lesson over. But historically, Belgian managers have had difficulty dealing with the media because there's essentially really two media in Belgium, not just one. You've got the Dutch media and you've got the French media, and they both have their own agendas and their own interests. And there's always been this tension between, there's too many Dutch-based players, speaking players in the squad, or too many French, or there's a bias this way or that way. So there's been this thing about kind of trying to keep all sections of the media happy. And that the advantage Roberto Martinez had, and the thing that was really attractive from the Belgian FA's point of view, is he's a neutral. He's not Belgian himself. He doesn't have a long professional connection with either the Dutch-speaking Flemish community or the French community in the south of Belgium. And because he spent most of his career in British football, a lot of that squad, about a third of that Belgian squad, have either played in England for a good length of time or are still there at the moment. And some of them played under him in England as well. So that kind of high-intensity physical side to the British game is something that was very attractive to the Belgian FA, partly because of his knowledge of those players, but also because Belgian football has this wonderful balance of being very strong physically, but also very strong tactically. So I think all of those factors appeal to the Belgian FA. And then when you add in how good a communicator he is, and he's quite good tactically, he's pretty underrated as a tactician, I think, as well, then I think he was a really, really good choice. And he's just grasped that opportunity because he talked about, he's talked in the past about not being looking for a job like that. He wasn't looking for an international job. So for the opportunity to come up was a surprise to him. And he's a very open-minded guy as well. And, I think he's enjoyed being in Belgium and making that his home. So it's all just going to come together, really.
Chuck, Roberto Martinez is only 47, which I think is quite surprising considering just how long he's been in the game. I mean, we're coming up for 10 years since, we're not too far off 10 years since Wigan won the FA Cup under him. And what are your sort of perceptions of him, and how do you think he's treated over here? Because when, for example, the Tottenham Hotspur job comes up as it's still somehow vacant after all these weeks, when Roberto Martinez gets linked to that, I feel like the backlash, the pushback on that is pretty severe. People think that he isn't a man who is sort of capable of taking on a top six Premier League job, or perhaps doesn't have the right skill set. So what's your sort of interpretation of that?
Yeah, I don't understand why there's such a negative perception, personally. I mean, Belgium have come into this tournament as a number ranked team in the world. And that's under Martinez's helm. So I don't understand why people would have anything but at least an open reception to him. I mean, have your reservations, absolutely, because obviously some of his performances in England didn't go exactly to plan, but no manager's does. There's not a manager on this planet who can have every game plan out exactly how they want it to. That's just football. So I've been really impressed with Martinez and what he's been able to do with Belgium. I was a fan of him when he was in England. That Wigan FA Cup win was historic, and obviously we still do speak about it today. And I think he's well within his right to be included in the kind of hunt for jobs like Tottenham and things like that. Whether they would take it, I don't think he would want to up sticks and move to Tottenham compared to the job he's got at the moment. I'd imagine the Belgian national team job is much more attractive to most people, not just him. So yeah, I've been really impressed, and I'm really excited to see what he can kind of go on and do with this squad in this tournament.
And my sort of perception of Roberto Martinez was certainly enhanced by the documentary I watched last night on the BBCI Player, Scott. I saw you tweeting about it on the Belgian Football Podcast. I thought I should check it out, and it was certainly an interesting watch. Do you maybe just sort of give some of your thoughts on it, and what that sort of does for Belgian football to have a man like that who's very comfortable talking at the media at the helm, but he's also doing a lot of work behind the scenes in terms of Belgian football as a whole, not just this current national team. He's trying to sort of revolutionise the game across all levels.
Yeah, well, for anyone who hasn't seen it, check out BBCI Player. It's called Whistle to Whistle. It's a kind of hour-long documentary that follows Roberto around, chatting to him really about kind of his role, and really kind of how he sees the kind of national team's set up. So you get to see a lot of the behind the scenes stuff and a lot of the plans that the Belgian FA have in place to develop for the future. And I think you get a good insight into his personality in a way that, you know, people haven't before. I mean, people are often a little bit skeptical of managers who don't have these amazing CVs. And his CV, actually, I think his CV is you know, pretty good. I mean, I don't understand the sort of, I think it's the football fans sometimes think if somebody hasn't had a big job with whatever club, then that somehow, you know, means they're not qualified for a certain role. And it's just not always the case. There's so many different aspects to kind of coaches and managers that fans don't always see. And he's quite a good example of that, I think. You see him in the programme talking about his kind of love of scouting and how the best part of his job actually is when he gets to go and watch Belgian Pro League games. And that's a really nice side, I think, to the way he handles his job, because there's a lot of national team managers don't do those basic things of spending a lot of their time watching players. They rely on their scouts to go and do that and bring back reports, but he doesn't. He enjoys that old-fashioned aspect of, you know, getting in the car and spending a weekend watching some games and kind of talking to coaches at other clubs. And there's a really nice bit in that documentary where he talks about how when he goes out to watch players, how he doesn't really like to talk to coaches at clubs. He doesn't like to get in the way of people doing their job. He likes to turn up, watch them discreetly, make his own notes, and then kind of disappear like he wasn't there. And I think that's absolutely the right way to do it. And that's a really good example of how his man management's very good as well, and how good a communicator is. He's very good with people. He doesn't get in the way. He doesn't interfere too much. He makes the best use of what's there, and instills confidence and ownership in the players to express themselves, to get the best out of them. It's nice to see as well that they showed his involvement with the development of the new training complex that they're building there as well, because I don't know if anybody will know, but the situation in Belgium at the moment is, for a long time, and before Roberto was in post, the national team used to use Anderlecht's training facilities at their Neerpied Academy, which is just outside Brussels. But when he came in, they decided they were going to set up some new facilities, and the national team in Belgium are based in Tbilisi, which is not far from Brussels, and their administrative centre is still in Brussels, but the plan is to move the administrative side of everything and all the playing facilities and sports science into one complex in Tbilisi, and that's due to be kind of completed, I think, early next year. And that's the future of Belgian football the next 10 or 15 years. And the really exciting thing is the generation coming up behind this one is every bit as good. I mean, there's players in there. I mean, I made a note this morning. There's Sambi Lokonga, Charles de Ketelaere at Bruges, Jari Verscharen, Zeno van Huysen at Standard. There's 4 or 5, you know, world-class young players there who probably will see at the World Cup in the next 18 months, and maybe at the Nations League final against France in the autumn as well. So the future of Belgian football is really bright, and he's been absolutely central to that.
When you're talking about the sort of respect for coaches and staying away, I love that moment when Vincent Kompany, who was, of course, Anderlecht manager now, spots him. And Martinez is almost sending him away. He's like, don't waste your time talking to me. But it's clear that Kompany has so much respect and holds Martinez in such high regard. He'd like to have that conversation with him. And it seemed as though when you talk about Martinez being a great communicator, he has time to talk to anyone. People might be cynical and say when there's cameras on, you're going to be like that. But you do get the impression that Roberto Martinez, when he's at these training grounds, he'll talk to volunteers and fans of these club sides and players and just whoever crosses paths with him, really. He seems like a man who very much enjoys just talking football. And the sort of relationships he had with his family as well were explored in that, and that they were very sort of heartwarming to see. A man who made a couple of cameos in the documentary was Shaun Maloney, and we saw him a couple of times last night, and Twitter in this country seemed to go, oh, remember Shaun Maloney's there. So I guess I'll ask you a bit about his role and how he's regarded in this national team, because I think some people maybe have a bit of a raised eyebrow when they see a Shaun Maloney who had a successful career in terms of Scottish and English football, but obviously there's some of the world's best players at Belgium, and they ask, how does that dynamic work of Shaun Maloney telling Kevin De Bruyne how to do a warm-up? And I'm not a fan of that attitude, but it's out there, it exists. So what do people make of Shaun Maloney out there?
Well, I think there's I don't think people pay too much attention really to Roberto's kind of backroom team so much in Belgium. I mean, the interesting thing, and coming back to what I was saying about Roberto's kind of neutrality with the media, and how useful that is from the Belgian FA's point of view, it's the same for Shaun, actually. I think having anybody who doesn't have, I think, a connection to either Flanders or the French-speaking community in a way has an advantage, because then they'll concentrate on the football rather than, any bias that may or may not actually be there. And often there isn't. It's just a perception, a cultural perception thing. Obviously, Roberto's relationship with Shaun kind of goes back to their time at Wigan. And Roberto's always been extremely complimentary about Shaun, and I've heard him speaking about how much he admires his footballing intelligence and how surprised he was by that when he first signed him as well. When he first went to Wigan, he had no idea he was as good a player as he actually was. I mean, most people who'd seen him regularly would know he was a good player, but I think getting to see him up close and getting to work with him every day on the training pitch, I think his opinion of him kind of was elevated even further. And I think that's why he was so keen to bring him in as part of his backroom staff, because his understanding of the game and the way that he communicates as well, I think was something that he wanted to kind of have around. And I think his outlook is kind of footballing philosophy is very, very similar to Roberto's as well, in terms of how he likes teams to play. And I think he's got quite a bright kind of coaching future if he wants it ahead of him in his own right. Whether he wants to stay part of somebody's backroom team or kind of step out on his own is something we'll find out in due course. But I think, as long as Roberto's there, I think Shaun will be there as well.
Yeah, Jack, and I think we've seen Shaun Maloney's football intelligence and his sort of punditry appearances in Scotland over the past 12 months or so on Sports Scene on Sky Sports. He's done a great job of tactically dissecting the Scottish game, which is something we don't always get in our media coverage in this country.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, throughout the season, we've always had kind of conversation over who we kind of regard as kind of the highest speaking figures coming out of Scotland in terms of our own game. And we've all kind of settled on the fact that Shaun Maloney has been absolutely fantastic dissecting the game and just providing that extra view that you might not have had otherwise. And part of me almost feels that Shaun Maloney just kind of gets glossed over in terms of the Belgian setup, just in terms of people remembering, like you said on Twitter last night, people were reminded of the fact that he was there when he stood with his tactic sheet speaking to Dries Mertens, almost kind of overshadowed by Thierry Henry's influence and his role in that setup as well. But I'm not really surprised to see him so involved and so kind of well regarded, considering how well he speaks about football. When you listen to him, he's obviously got an incredible footballing intelligence, and there's no real surprise to me that he's doing so well with Belgium just now.
Yeah, he's clearly a very smart man. Well, the question there, Scott, on our tagline is, can Belgium go all the way? It's a pretty tough quarter-final awaiting them on Friday in Munich as they play Italy, who I think a lot of people would say had looked the strongest in the tournament so far. Obviously had a tough game against Austria. How are you feeling about that one? Do you feel like there's areas in this Italian side that Belgium will be able to exploit?
I'm a little bit nervous about it, if I'm honest. I think the potential winners of the tournament could be in this tie on Friday night. I would totally agree with you. I think the Italians are the side that have impressed me the most. I think they've been looking really, really good. I really like the way Roberto Mancini's got them playing as well. He's completely changed their mindset. It's been, a massive cultural shift in the way that Italians kind of approach both their playing style, but also tournaments as well, because they now play for 90 minutes, the Italians as well. They don't just play in phases in games. And that's a big change as well. So, the Red Devils are going to have to be at their best, I think, on Friday night. And again, they're going to have to be patient. The one thing that gives me, a lot of hope, actually, is the Italians like to play quite narrow in the midfield. A lot of things go through the centre, and Belgium don't. They like to keep it wide. So that gives me some cheer that, there might be some joy for them. And I think the game will be won and lost definitely in the midfield. I think it'll be a very open game. And I think it might go the distance as well. There's every possibility of that, but I'm nervous because it wouldn't have been my choice to play them at the moment. And I just think it's difficult because Belgium going all the way is really reliant on their top players performing. And as a lot of people know, a lot of their top players at the moment aren't quite 100% in terms of their fitness. So there's that lingering worry that, do they have another, is there another potentially 3 really tough games in those legs? That would be my biggest worry. But, they've been playing so well and all the signs are so positive at the moment, and, there's no reason to suspect that they can't. It's just, turn up, play your game and, do the business, really. I think the Italians, I was watching their game against Austria and I thought, actually, there's opportunities here. This side are, they are beatable. And I think the first goal, a bit like last night against Portugal, is going to be really, really important tactically and determine how the game pans out as well.
Italy obviously like to hold on to a lot of the ball. That's what Roberto Mancini has changed. And Belgium are the same when they're able to do it. They like to dictate the play as well. So how do you think that will, if Italy are holding on to the ball, are you confident that Martinez will come up with a plan to be able to counter on them, to sort of perhaps make the most of that high line with sort of aging centre halves?
Yeah, I think it's very important that there isn't too big a gap that opens up between the Belgian midfield and defence. That line has to be kind of quite compact, because the last thing you want is that defence getting exposed. And it's been a worry of mine, leading into the tournament, actually, because we saw glimpses of what can happen against Denmark in the group game. If that happens, Jason Denaer's mistake aside, I think that's a really good example of the worst case scenario. Axel Witsel's a very, very important player in all of this, I think, because of where he sits in that midfield. He protects that back three, but he also controls a lot of what happens in front of him as well, and doesn't get given credit for that in an offensive sense. People always talk about Tielemans and Hazard and Mounier or Carrasco or whoever's playing in that wing, but actually Witsel's offensive capabilities are pretty underrated, and he's been looking really, really good for somebody who's just come back from a horrific injury. In fact, he's looking better actually in terms of his fitness than De Bruyne or Hazard actually are, which has kind of surprised everybody, including me. So Witsel's going to be really, really important, I think, and really important to that game as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Scott. It's been fascinating talking to you. It's really, really great insight. In case anyone's this is the first time them seeing you on A State of Mind, do you want to let them know where they can find you and the Belgian Football Podcast as well?
Yeah, sure. You can find me on my own personal Twitter at Scott_coin. So if you want to come and attack me there, you can do that. And you can find the Belgian Football Podcast at Belgian Podcast on Twitter. And if you search for us on Facebook and Instagram, you'll find us there as well. We've got a kind of weekly pod where we cover everything happening in Belgian football. And we throw in some extra special episodes every so often as well. And we should have something out kind of quite soon covering last night as well.
And hopefully we'll be able to talk to you about a Belgium semi-final appearance. But it'll be a tough game, and all the best of luck for Friday against the Italians.
Cheers. Thanks very much, guys. Yeah,
thanks very much, Scott.
Cheers, Scott.
Yeah.
You too. And Jack, we should get on to talking about the Dutch game last night, because we'll get on to actually reading a couple of these comments, because we're asking if Belgium can go all the way. Strangely, the doctor's saying Roberto is a quality manager, and I expect Belgium to make it to the semi-finals at least, possibly all the way, and for sure they have a fighting chance at winning the thing. Scott House says still Italy to win it for me, and JJI says God, I hope not. Stuck £50 on Italy for an outright win about 6 weeks ago, £25 each way. It was definitely be an interesting game, that one. Such good insight from Scott there, really, really good to listen to. Certainly knows his stuff, and a lot of insight on a Belgian team who we all sort of look at because of their star power, but perhaps don't sort of get be on the surface enough. So that was very, very worthwhile, I think. Jack, but like I said, we should talk about the other game last night, because it's dealt a shock of the round of 16. But let me ask you how much of a shock it is, because we're sort of increasingly seeing throughout this tournament that perhaps Holland aren't all they were cracked up to be, or all they're supposed to be in terms of sort of football lineage. And we've also seen throughout this tournament that the Czech Republic are perhaps a more decent side than we gave them credit for, certainly in this country.
No, it's certainly something we talked about towards the end of last week, just whether Holland were actually going to be the team that the group stage perceived them to be, because they had a fantastic group stage. They won 3 from 3 and scoring quite freely as well, but they weren't coming up against too many high quality opponents in that group. I mean, the Ukraine game could have probably been a kind of warning sign, the fact that they conceded 2 very late on, and it was that late winner from Denzel Dumfries that got them the win in the end. But I think that the real warning sign was before the tournament even started, when they conceded 2 goals to Scotland. Like that was a big warning sign about the Dutch coming into it. But I've been massively impressed by the Czech Republic. I think they were great against us, obviously, even though I'd like to say we were the better side on the day and luck didn't fall our way. I thought they looked impressive against Croatia, and I think just individual quality from Ivan Perisic negated that being a win for the Czechs, and then it was just a pretty dull game at Wembley against England regardless. So I'm not massively surprised. There's a lot of players in that team who will jump out because of their European presence across the leagues. I mean, your likes of Thomas Souček and Vladimir Kufal at West Ham, Patrick Schick playing in Germany, but players like Alex Kral and Holish as well. The defender wearing number 9 who got a goal and assist in last night's victory. These players have kind of flown under the radar, but cohesively as a unit, they've blended really well together, and I think it's a really, really solid team. Yeah,
and Holish effectively marched Gino Wijnaldum out the game yesterday, which I think was massive, because he's so influential in that sort of number 10 role for the Netherlands. And perhaps it was because Wijnaldum was marked at the game, but I just felt as though, despite their sort of very talented squad, there was no real attacking game plan in this one for the Netherlands. They didn't seem to have a particular way they wanted to break down the Czech Republic or deal with the Czech Republic's admittedly commendable high press. I mean, they didn't let them play out, and they were very sort of deliberate in their press and action. So Stekelenburg had to kick. And then you're in that sort of 50-50 situation, and we know they're a very physical side, and the Czech Republic were doing well to come out with those balls. But it seemed to me it was as if, give it to Memphis Depay, hope he does something. And at times he did. He wriggled through players and stuff like that, but it wasn't consistent enough, and it wasn't sort of tailored enough to this Czech Republic side and trying to beat them. Perhaps there wasn't enough respect given. I'm not 100% sure, but Frank de Boer came under a lot of criticism, as he often does. Do you think that's perhaps a bit harsh, though, Jack, considering that Daniel Malin was through on goal after a massive burst of pace? He had time to slot it past and instead tries to go around the keeper, and then 26 minutes later, Matthias de Ligt is playing basketball just outside his own box and gets sent off. It's a pretty harsh turnaround, and is it maybe a step too far to go into Frank de Boer when you've got individual mistakes such as those?
I think you have to look at it from both angles, because obviously you can come at the manager for setting up wrong in the game in itself and not having that plan B if putting it up to Memphis Depay goes wrong. I think the substitution after de Ligt was sent off just less than 30 seconds after that missed chance from Malin was odd. I think putting Quincy Promes on at wing back was an interesting decision to be a positive mindset about it, an odd one if we're talking more bluntly. But then it comes down to decision making. I mean, you saw two massive decisions in the space of 30 seconds. That Malin chance, if he just hits that, gets it on target rather than round to keeper, it's a goal. And then you ignore that when you say, okay, he's tried to go around. Another decision to be made, Matthias de Ligt on the ground and decides to just punch the ball clear, slap it clear, and get sent off for it after a lengthy VAR check. So I think you can kind of look at it from both ways. You can look at it attacking the manager for his tactics or for individual decisions throughout the game. Because realistically, you saw de Ligt midway through the first half, he was screaming at the rest of the team for giving the check. I can't remember who exactly it was. It might have been Czech got a shot away and put it wide, and he just turned around and he's roaring at the rest of the team because he's furious that even was allowed to happen. But it continued to, and he gets sent off, so he couldn't really marshal that from on the pitch anymore. So there had to be someone on that pitch with a sense of leadership to be able to say, look, this isn't good enough, we need to do things differently. Someone could have stepped up at half time and said to the manager potentially, it's not working this way, why don't we try it that way? But no one did, clearly, and Czechs went on and won the game deservedly so, because there was no positive reaction from Holland in any way, shape or form.
Yeah, I sometimes feel like leadership is sort of a buzzword that we throw out there in football when a team doesn't perform, and say if they had a bit more leadership, they would have been fine, or this wouldn't have happened. And I think that's sometimes just a cover-up for sort of tactical ineptitude or just a player not stepping up to the plate. I'm not sure that leadership is always the answer, but in this case, I do just get the sense that this young Dutch side, whose usual leader is, of course, Virgil van Dijk, the best centre-back in the world, and it seemed as though, like you said, Matthias de Ligt tried to sort of assume that role. They got better defensively when he came in. They were poor in that first game against Ukraine, and they improved in the defensive sense when he came into that back line. But he's still so young, de Ligt, and the way he defends, at this moment in time at least, he's still quite a rash defender. He's sort of all or nothing. And sometimes that physicality and the way that he will throw himself into a situation can come off very, very well. And that's why it was so aesthetically pleasing to watch him at Ajax in that great run. But when that doesn't come off, you get moments like you did last night. And it was interesting to hear Gary Neville speaking on ITV after the game, where he said an experienced defender, an older defender, makes that first mistake but doesn't make the second one. He slips, but he lets the defender through, and if he scores, he scores, because you've still got 11 men on the pitch and you're still the better team. Whereas Matthias de Ligt in his youth perhaps tries to compensate for the first mistake, then makes a second mistake, and then leaves his team. They weren't a goal down at the time, but they're 10 men down, and they were already struggling to penetrate the Czech Republic with even numbers on the pitch. So I think you're going to struggle even more when it's 10 versus 11, and Holland didn't manage a single shot on target in that game. So I think that says a lot. We've got two other games in the round of 16 that we weren't able to touch on over the weekend, so we could very quickly do that. And we spoke about the two sort of fairy tale sides meeting each other between Wales and Denmark. it wasn't a fairy tale ending for Wales and for Gareth Bale. They were absolutely decimated in this one, Jack.
They absolutely were, which kind of surprised me, especially watching the first kind of 20 minutes or so, because I thought Wales were the better side in the opening exchanges. I thought they looked a bit more up for it. I think Gareth Bale was hungry for something, just storming up that right-hand side, cutting in like he's done for years, and he looked almost similarly to Hazard. He looks like the player he once was for portions of that game. But then a brilliant individual strike from Kasper Dolberg, who moments before, as I did with Dubravka, seemed to curse him, but I blessed Dolberg, I think that would be the inverse, in saying that I think I saw him on the pitch, and I remembered I put in our group chat saying, did everyone remember when Kasper Dolberg was going to be the next big thing? And then he hits a goal worthy of someone being the next big thing. It was a fantastically hit strike, just a beautiful curve into the bottom right, given Danny Ward, who has, for me, been the most impressive goalkeeper at the tournament so far, especially in the group stages. I thought his performances were absolutely crucial for Wales in their progression to the last 16. Gave him absolutely no chance with that strike, and that kind of seemed to sink Wales a little bit more after conceding that first goal, because it was tough, because coming into this one I saw them being a good match for each other, not in terms of quality, because I think Denmark have better individual quality, but just the defensive unit that Wales have been able to muster up under Rob Page at this tournament has been very, very impressive, and they're a very good physical side. So I thought they were going to be fairly evenly matched in terms of that, but I think the quality that Denmark's squad have just shone through on the day.
And Chris Gunter's been quite critical in the last couple of days about the perhaps unfairness of Euro 2020 in its format. Obviously, Wales were in Baku for their first two, then travelled to Rome for their last game against Italy, and then were in Amsterdam, weren't they, on Saturday? Whereas their opponents had done far less travelling. Of course, they were based in Copenhagen for their 3 games, and then it's a short trip to Amsterdam for them. Do you think there's something in that? Do you think that teams can be getting annoyed about stuff like this? I know Portugal, some members of the Portugal side felt similarly before their game last night, considering they'd been in Budapest before heading to... Where was the game last night, Jack? Seville.
Yes, it was in Seville. There could be something in it. I mean, I think looking at distance travelled, I mean, England haven't had to go anywhere. We'll get that agenda going immediately. But I think there was an excuse.
Very far either.
No, we didn't either. We didn't either. That's a very good point. I think Frankie de Jong came out after the game and said it was a tough game because they struggled to acclimatise to the kind of heat of Hungary, considering they travelled as well. So I think there is the argument, but at the same time, if you know you're going to be jetting across various different countries for this tournament, you could easily be prepared for it, to be honest. I think if you've got that in your head that you're going to be travelling, you kind of get over that mental barrier and just go out and play the game regardless. Yeah,
I saw Craig Anderson on the terrace saying that if Portugal were so upset about having to travel so much, if they just hadn't finished third in their group, if they'd decided to finish higher up in the group, they wouldn't have had so much travelling. So
exactly.
If that was consistent, if third place teams did have to travel more as a result of finishing third, then I think that's fair. But I think it's a little bit more scattergun than that. Mm-hmm. And you always get that tournaments that some team will have to travel a little bit further, but of course that's normally within the confines of 1 or 2 countries rather than an entire continent. I don't think people will be clamouring for a cross-continent European Championships again in a hurry, but it makes money, and we know that's a priority a lot of the time. And what game am I missing?
You're missing Italy game, yeah.
Yeah, and we spoke about that, and I have a curse when I say that a team or a player is good and they automatically become rubbish, because I tweeted out saying I can watch this Italy team. I can watch this Italy team all day, and then basically from that point I immediately wanted to stop watching them, because it turned from, the thing I loved about that team was they did sometimes play it sideways and backwards, but only when they really had to. The first thought is always to try and break the lines, or to get somebody on the ball and beat a man, like we saw from Spinazzola on that left-hand side, and he was a menace down that flank the entire game. And And then second half, it was a lot more sort of passive. They weren't really penetrating Austria in the same sort of sense.
Mm-hmm.
And Austria came into that game and used their physicality and their technical ability as well to really make this difficult for the Italians. Was this the first time, Jack, we saw a kind of chink in their armour? Is this the first time that we saw a real sort of susceptibility about this Italian team at the Euros?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say the susceptibility of it because they still held firm and got to extra time and they scored 2 goals before Austria scored theirs through old foe of Scotland, Sasa Kaladzic, with that really, really impressive header. So it's hard to say whether it is that kind of weakness. Obviously, they would have wanted to score in normal time and close the game out in 90. I mean, they had chances to do so. You think the Immobile shot that 2 inches to the right, it goes in and hits off the outside of the post. Daniel Bachmann breathing a sigh of relief as he sees it go past his top left corner. The Berardi chance, it gets crossed in from Spinazzola again on the left, and he goes to bicycle kick it and sends it into orbit, more or less, nowhere near the goal. So there were definitely chances. And like you, Sean, I was exactly the same. Really, really impressed. I was loving what I was seeing in the first 35, 40 minutes, and then it just fell. It just really, really dropped in terms of the kind of quality of the game because it just got that kind of passive way, just a lot more containment, ball retention, rather than carving out real chances. And Italy were just doing their best to make sure that they kept hold of the ball, but they weren't really looking to do anything with it. And then that provided Austria with a chance to nick it and go and break, as we saw them do on a couple of occasions. Of course, they opened the scoring through Marko Arnautovic, but it was ruled out for an offside through VAR. So that was kind of a glaring warning sign that this potentially won't be as easy a run as the Italian fans might have thought.
Yeah, definitely. And an extra time, the substitutes came good for Roberto Martinez. I might have redeemed myself a bit because I did say in our group chat that Chiesa needed to get on the park. And it worked, and then he scored the opening goal. A great volley as well from him. And he's fought his way into the Juventus side when perhaps he wasn't. That wasn't in the script. I don't think he was meant to feature in the Juventus start lineup just yet, considering his age and the sort of profile players they also have in that squad. But he forced his way in last season, and he might have just done the same for this Italian national team, considering that Berardi didn't have his best game on Saturday, and then maybe that Chiesa might have just given himself a chance against Belgium on Friday. Some interesting comments coming in. Strangely, the doctor saying it's a disadvantage for sure. That's us talking about travelling, but the game stays the same. I think that's a good point to make. And I might leave some language out, but Feed the Bear saying that's why they get paid millions year in, year out. Shouldn't be moaning about travelling. They get well treated, and they're coming up with excuses. And I think you won't hear much about travelling concerns. Genuine concerns might be raised after the tournament, but I think in the emotion of getting knocked out of a major tournament, that might be something that comes to the fore a little bit more. Let's talk about tonight's games, Jack, in the time we've got left. And I think the biggest story heading into this game is the absence of Ivan Perisic, who tested positive for COVID-19. And I'm not massively fussed who goes through this game, but just personally, I find it disappointing when a team's star player or one of their star players has to pull out, because that's what we're here for, these European Championships, especially in these latter stages, is to see the best play the best. And Ivan Perisic has been one of Croatia's best players so far this tournament.
No, you're absolutely right. He has been, and it's going to be a massive loss for Croatia in terms of their attacking output. I'm not really sure what to make of this game, because I feel like it could go one of two ways. It could be really, really entertaining or really, really dour. And it's going to pan out the exact same way in terms of play style, but it's either going to be goals coming from it in terms of Spain wanting to retain possession and carve out chances, as we saw them do on numerous occasions, but fail to hit the target really until that final game against Slovakia. And Croatia were the same. We've seen them score some really nice. I mean, obviously we don't want to spend too much time talking about it, but Modric against Scotland, that was an excellent finish from a player of outstanding technical and footballing ability. But I just feel it's two big nations, but it has the chance to be a bit of a dead rubber in my eyes, because I've not really been too excited by either one of the two teams in the tournament this far. Just I feel like it's been a lot of reserve possession and uninspiring kind of football going forward. So I'm hoping I'm wrong. I'm hoping that is a really, really entertaining game in here. And there's definitely the players in there that can make it an entertaining game. But from what I've seen, I'm not entirely convinced. And I don't know if that just might be me talking absolute nonsense. But
what's your concern is the fact that they're both quite technical sides that perhaps their possession play is a bit passive and you're not getting as many sort of chances, that the ball's sort of held in the two in their respective midfield areas, and we're not seeing much sort of goal-mouth action.
Aye, more or less that. I mean, obviously the good players in there that do have fantastic attacking capabilities. I mean, your likes of Modric, Rebic has been good for AC Milan this season, for example. Perisic obviously is a big loss, but you've got players like Orsic that could come in potentially. Vlasic has been quite good. And then Spain, on the other hand, Gerard Moreno, we keep going back to him. He might have kind of fluffed his lines a couple of times for Spain in this tournament, but he's still a 30-goal-a-season striker this year. So that shouldn't be undervalued whatsoever. Pedri in the midfield can play further forward. We've seen him on the left for Barcelona a fair bit this season, and he is a really, really exciting creative spark. And you've got a lot of players like Ferran Torres has been good for Man City. He'll probably come off the bench. So there's good attacking talent, but it's just whether either team utilises it to its maximum capability or not.
Yeah, hopefully they do. Hope for a good game in that one. And let's move on now to perhaps the most mismatched game of the tournament so far, or the round of 16. The one that I think would produce the biggest shock if the underdogs were to win, and that's France versus Switzerland. Is there any way you see the Swiss coming out on top of this one, Jack?
It really is hard to say, isn't it? It's hard to look past France. I mean, they were earmarked as one of the tournament favourites for a reason. And although they didn't have the most awe-inspiring group stage, they never really do in major tournaments. They always kind of save their best for the knockouts. So this could kind of be the first opportunity to see a real France team at an international tournament in the knockouts, because they're just so good going forward. They're so good in defence. Their midfield's excellent. Paul Pogba has been an absolute revelation this tournament and reminding people of his obvious quality. So there's definitely going to be goals in this game. I don't see this being anything but a free scorer. But you can't. There's some really good players in the Swiss team. Xherdan Shaqiri seems to turn up at every single tournament for the Swiss with at least one belter of a goal. Like Freuler's been quite good in midfield. Remo Freuler, the Atalanta midfielder. Real Donat Bolo up front. He can cause some real problems getting in behind the defence. They've got some decent defenders in Manuel Akanji and Nico Elvedi of Borussia's Dortmund and Mönchengladbach, relatively. And then Jan Sommer has been really, really good in goal for a number of years in Germany. So again, there's a lot of good players in that Swiss team, but it's hard to look past France considering not only the starting 11, but the strength and depth that they have throughout that squad.
You can very much imagine Switzerland trying their absolute best to completely stifle this game and sort of nullify those attacking threats of France. I don't expect them to have a high line when you've got a player like Kylian Mbappe who could get right in behind them. So perhaps this game might not be the best viewing. I think that maybe a lot of possession play for France. So we'll have to see how they can unlock what I'm sure will be a stern Swiss defence, and it might be down to Paul Pogba, who's been probably their key player so far. We have to see him, some of these fantastic balls over the top or diagonal passes, and see if they can come out with those, and if it's enough to overcome Switzerland, who, like I said, it would be a shock, but I don't want to completely write them off, because it's the last 16 European Championships, and like you said, they've got some very talented players. So we'll have to wait and see with that one, and we'll be reviewing these games on tomorrow's show, same time, 11 a.m. Hopefully be joined by two fantastic panelists to talk through all that, and we hope you'll join us then as well. I'll first of all say a massive thank you again to Scott Coyne for joining us from the Belgian Football Podcast. Really, really fascinating insight. So definitely check that out if you're looking to learn some stuff about Belgian football. Of course, Jack Hendry made his move to Ostend permanent this week. So that's one to keep an eye on, and whether he stays there, whether there's other teams in Belgium who want to have a look at him. So good to see a Scotland player test himself abroad. We've seen more of that in recent years. And if you need any information on that, Scott and the Belgian Football Podcast is the place to go. I'll say thank you as well to Jack Donnelly for joining me. It's been a pleasure talking to you, sir. And hopefully we'll do it again soon this week. Thank you to everyone for watching, and we'll see you again tomorrow.